Part one of Canadian director Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Frank Herbert's 1965 novel Dune is quite possibly one of the best and most successful book-to-movie adaptations in cinema history. But how do you follow that? Expectations are riding high, and Villeneuve doesn't want to disappoint. But he also doesn't want to just do exactly what he did the first time. He wants to do better. Will he succeed? We're about to find out.
This is New York City zero-budget guerrilla filmmaker Sean Weathers.
And I'm Canadian screenwriter and playwright Angus Combe. Join us as we continue our journey through Denis Villeneuve's vision of Frank Herbert's epic world in Dune Part 2. The No Rules Film School is now in session.
So Dune Part 1 felt like a setup movie. Slow-paced, a lot of building up of the chosen one trope. So our lead character is Harry Potter. He is Luke Skywalker. He is Neo. He is insert whatever, Jesus of Nazareth. Yes. They really built him up. And he wandered for 40 days and for 40 nights in the desert, fighting sandworms, as we all read about in the Bible.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
This is The Empire Strikes Back. This is the movie that is just ready to go into, war, guns blazing. So, let's get into this breakdown, and hopefully that's what we're going to get.
Dune, Part 2. Princess Irulan Corrino believes that Paul Atreides may still be alive, while her father, the Emperor, seems to be depressed by his involvement in the destruction of the House Atreides. On Arrakis, some Fremen suspect Jessica and Paul are spies, but others, like Stilgar, believe the prophecy of a mother and son from the outer world bringing prosperity to Arrakis. Any thoughts on this initial part before we go deeper?
Yeah, so you could find some real world stuff if you looked hard enough in the first one. But this one really seems like, this is about the Middle East, this is about oil, this is about religious zealots, this is about actual real life conflict. We can use these characters in the situations as avatars for a charismatic leader who may not necessarily be the best person to be leader. In this case, he questions himself. Well, normally people in these situations don't question themselves. They question you for questioning them. But we've seen a lot of charismatic leaders who lead us down the road to war and dark places. I mean, look no further than George Bush Jr., even sooner, Donald Trump. We've had plenty of instances of, other countries with communism. We have plenty of instances where there have been terrible leaders who have been incredibly charismatic, able to capture the people, and especially when you have religion involved. And do you go against the written word? What was prophesied? So a lot of that stuff comes into play, and it feels more real world than the spaceships in the desert that the first one felt like.
Yeah, totally. Stilgar informs Jessica that the Reverend Mother is dying and urges her to become the replacement by drinking the water of life, which is a fatal poison for males and the untrained. Jessica does that, and she survives the poison, and she inherits the memories of every female ancestor in her lineage. The poison also seems to awake the mind of Jessica's unborn daughter, Alia, and Jessica is able to communicate with her. And this is actually one of the differences, I think, between the book and the movie, in that Alia is more of a character who actually appears. She's born and she's actually a character that walks around, but she remains an unborn child throughout this story. Do you have any thoughts about this stuff?
No, when you start getting into the book stuff, man, I don't want to touch that shit,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
gonna be a
yeah.
lot more people who know a lot more about
Oh
what's going
yes,
on with the books than we do. And I ain't touching anything with the
totally,
books.
totally.
Focusing on just the movie. It's
Yes.
an interesting way to get more dynamic going on because honestly, it's just a mother and her son was the last third of the last movie we saw. And now it's just the mother, the son, and the girlfriend is the main focus of this movie. So you have all these characters, all these planets, all these warring factions, but the movie just boils down to a few characters, honestly. And
Mhm.
now instead of two, we have a third in there, and it's basically them pulling him in different directions. The mother pulling him more to be this leader, whether it's to get them off the planet, whether it's to manipulate them into getting her son into a higher position, manipulating the people in their beliefs that she knows has probably been planted there and it's not true, or whether it's her wanting her son to be powerful. She has her motives and she is
Mhm.
trying to, she's playing chess while these other people are, playing checkers. And then you have the
Yes.
girlfriend who wants to keep him away from all this stuff. She doesn't believe in all that religious zealotry.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting dynamic between the three of them that really pushes this movie forward, and this part of the movie kind of develops that. One of the more funny side stories going on at this point to me is Dave Bautista. There's not a lot of humor in this, especially when
Mhm.
you get rid of Duncan Idaho, and he's gone from the first one.
Yeah.
Bautista here is hilarious. How he's just constantly effing up and just like killing people every time he fucks up. It's like, "Arr!" It's like he's just constantly flipping out and killing his henchmen and I
Yes.
thought his character was pretty funny. He added some levity to things.
He did. Yes. He's of course the nephew of the Baron and has been put in charge of all operations on Arrakis and getting rid of the Fremen and all that stuff. And he can't do it. He's failing.
No, and
Um,
somehow he's older than his uncle because Dave Bautista's up there. He's got to be older
yes.
than that guy.
Well, that's a good point. But I mean, his uncle seemed to die and then get resurrected, or maybe he didn't die. I'm not sure. But
Uh,
who knows? Maybe he's 1,000 years old, like Jabba
well,
the
I think
Hutt.
that I think part of the lore is that spice makes you live longer, so maybe that's it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's just
that
kind
could
of
be.
interesting to see the actor Batista being
Yeah.
younger than the actor
Yeah,
playing his uncle.
totally.
So.
Totally. And yes, Chani does not believe in the prophecy, and she actually thinks it's a way, it's designed to control the Fremen. It's not something that's going to help the Fremen. But she does slowly develop respect for Paul as she kind of watches him and listens to him, and the two do fall in love. And Paul embraces the Fremen ways. He learns their language, he learns all their customs, and he even rides a giant sandworm, which is one of their things as well. And he winds up taking a couple of Fremen names, Usul and Moadib, which means desert mouse. Um, yeah. And Baron Harkonnen winds up getting rid of your favorite character there, or replacing him with his more psychotic and murderous younger nephew, Fade Rotha, to run things on Arrakis. So he seems like a much more dangerous and deadly character than his the other character. Any thoughts on that?
So yeah, I mean, yeah, you obviously get more characters coming in here, um, and things are starting to develop a little bit more. Um, I think it's interesting that this movie has it's a long movie, but it's very
Mhm.
dense and there's so much to go on. So I'm kind of
Yes.
like I kind of want to take a step back and I kind of knock the other movie for
Yeah.
having all those wasted scenes of Zendaya turning around when they could have used that time more effectively.
Yeah.
So thank God now that Zendaya is a character, we don't have to waste all those scenes of just seeing her turn around so much. Thank God now they have time to have them practice sand walking because in a
Hmm.
dense movie like this, of all the things to cut out and not cut out, we see endless scenes of her showing him how to sandwalk. The very pivotal sandwalking scenes that we get a couple of, and we'll get a couple more of. So
Mm.
more efficient use of time here by
Yes.
Villeneuve.
Yes.
But yeah, we have more of the religious stuff moving forward. A lot of the same stuff. The story's developing more, characters developing more. There's more of a build-up going. The mother definitely is a character that's more of the more intriguing characters in the film.
Mhm.
Before, she was kind of in the backdrop. Everyone was kind of in the backdrop to the lead character. But now, even though she's not the lead, she seems to really be the most dangerous in a way, the way she's manipulating
Yeah.
things behind the scenes. And now that
Yeah.
she has another child in her belly, and the those religious nuns, zealots, whatever they were, I'm sure you'll know the name of it. You have maybe in front of you, I don't remember what they're called, but they were kind of implying that women, she should have had a female
Yes.
child. And then even when she drank the worm bile or whatever to give her the blue eyes and give her the powers of the Dune, the spice powers. They mention that it is about women and it'll kill men. So it kind of implies that as much as she's pulling the string, she now has another child in her belly that
Mhm.
potentially is more powerful and more
Yeah.
significant than her son. So she's becoming more of a significant character in the film as it develops as well.
Yes. The Bene Gesserit is the organization you were referring to. And
Trust me, in 2 minutes, I won't even know what you just said.
yes,
So
the Bene Gesserit. And actually, yeah, they it's interesting once this Fade Routha uh, appears, they actually start talking about him, and they seem to know that he's crazy, and they start to wonder, is it possible to control a crazy person? And they're actually thinking ahead to, maybe Paul isn't the one, and maybe this guy's going to wind up winning and he's going to be the one. And so they don't want to be on the losing team, so they actually send Lady Margot Fenring, who is a Bene Gesserit acolyte, and they send her to evaluate Fade's suitability as a prospective Kwisatz Haderach, and to seduce him and basically secure his genes. And so she does this, and it's interesting because I started to almost see this as like an ancient Rome kind of thing, where they're talking about the crazy, the crazy leader that they might have, and can we control him? Because that was always an issue with, the emperors like Nero that are crazy, but there are all these people trying to control them and get what they want from them. So it really kind of felt like a bit of ancient Rome coming into this. And oddly enough, we then see him fighting in an arena, just like in ancient Rome. He fights some guys, maybe to celebrate his birthday. Um, anyway, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, they showed that the guys he was fighting in the arena were all drugged, and the one time he had to fight an undrugged guy, like he kind of knew what was going on. So a lot, again, more of the manipulation going on behind the scenes, showing people the image of one thing, trying to make him seem like the great leader when he's not. Reminds me of, is it Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong? Well, who's the
Kim.
dad and who's the son?
Ooh,
Kim Jong-un is the son that's alive, or is that the
I
dad that died?
believe, I think so. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that sounds right.
Okay. Well, how he would have these golf games, quote unquote, where he would shoot a perfect score, and he's
Oh,
bowling,
yes.
he'd get a perfect score. And you had
Yeah.
to pretend that he did, or you'd get
Yeah.
killed or exiled. So, I mean, it's pretty much like you want to go back to ancient Rome. It's kind of going on right now, where it's
Yeah,
like
totally. Yeah.
this like chubby 5'1" guy who's like the greatest athlete of all time, but you can't catch any of it on camera, and anyone
No.
who's there who would say anything wrong will disappear. So yeah, that's it kind of reminded me of stuff like that going on behind the scenes. So
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, more Batista effing up. It's a lot of development. You're seeing um the story's more broken up in that you do have the three main characters, but you have, okay, here is this the what's it, the emperor and his daughter. You have
Yes.
that part with the nuns. You have Bautista constantly effing up and his replacement coming in. So you have that storyline going on, and then you have all the religious stuff going on in the desert. So there's a lot of cutting back and forth to all these stuff developing, but it's kind of like, you're kind of biding your time to the buildup of what's going to be inevitably all three of these stories colliding into one thing at the end.
Yeah, totally. So Jessica winds up traveling south because she wants to sort of further the legends and find more, perhaps, believers down south and start spreading the news about Paul down there. But Paul doesn't really feel comfortable. He actually fears some of the visions that he's been having, which show that many people will die and suffer if he goes south. And so he stays in the north. And he winds up reuniting with Gurney, who is his mentor and friend. And Gurney leads him to a hidden stockpile of atomic weapons. And when Fade Rautha attacks, ultimately Paul and the others are forced to go south. So in spite of everything, he does wind up going south. And he does drink the water of life and falls into a deep coma. And it's Chani who is able to awaken him by mixing her tears in with the water on his lips. And he winds up attaining knowledge through this process, including that Jessica, his mother, is actually the Baron's daughter. So the Baron, the bad guy who they are primarily fighting here, which makes Paul both an Atreides and a Harkonnen. So interesting twist there. Any thoughts on any of that stuff?
Yeah, that seemed like a plot twist that didn't really add anything. I'm sure like some book readers can say, yeah, well, technically, what? In book
Yeah,
5, chapter 6, but
yeah,
as far as the movie goes, it's like dun dun dun. You're actually, but as far as the movie plays out, that reveal does nothing. It doesn't affect the movie in any way. And it's almost like, maybe is that where, Luke, I'm your father comes from? I don't know. Where
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
you and me are not so different, it's like we're related type, you
Exactly.
know.
Yeah,
So I don't know, maybe that was Star Wars took that, George Lucas, I don't
yeah.
know, but
It could be.
and maybe in the book it plays a factor, or maybe later on in the movies it plays a factor, but it seems like a huge twist that didn't affect the movie in any way at all. Like if it wasn't
Yeah,
there, nothing would have been different. You also have him doing the typical white savior trope where he comes in, he becomes one of them, and he becomes the best ever that has ever been like a fighter. Like
yeah,
he's the best at everything in like a few short months, like
yeah,
centuries of these people doing this thing. He comes in a few months, he's better than anyone ever was at it
yeah,
doing, all this, worm riding and
yeah,
blowing up the spice ships and all that stuff. And obviously, his
yeah,
powers has something to do with it. I'm sure he's using his
yeah,
powers to see the future, so he knows where the ships are going to be. He can plan stuff like that out. But it's kind of
yeah,
funny that, like, I guess the writer's intention is to have this be a warning of the charismatic leader and playing against the white savior tropes, but in trying to play against it, they're just doing it. It's like,
yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah. Well, I guess it is probably meant to be that thing of, is there some supernatural magic thing going on here that makes him good? Like, is the prophecy true, or is it all just being orchestrated somehow behind the scenes by Jessica and the Bene Gesserit? So yeah, it's that kind of, maybe he does have special powers, maybe, So yeah, it's interesting. But he winds up proving himself to the southern Fremen leaders by reciting the thoughts of two Fremen spectators when he goes and addresses them. And they actually want him to challenge his friend for leadership, but he refuses, Stilgar. and he refuses and instead does this thing that really impresses them. And he winds up declaring himself the Lisan al-Gaib, and he sends a challenge to the emperor, who winds up coming to Arrakis with Irulan, his daughter. Any thoughts on this stuff?
I think at this point we do see a vision of the sister as well. So we actually get to see the actress who's going to play her later on.
Yeah.
It's that actress that plays every weird character in every movie ever made for the last 10 years, I think.
Oh, yes.
The actress with the big eyes. She's been in a lot of good stuff, but yeah, she plays the sister, so we do get a vision of the sister. So much like how we saw Zendaya play a very minor role, I have a feeling the sister is going to be a major role in the sequels coming up as well. So
Yeah.
he did what he didn't want to do. He didn't want to go to the South. He didn't want to be the leader, but I guess maybe he saw a vision of this is the way it has to be. But it
Yeah.
definitely seemed like drinking that worm bile definitely flipped a switch with his character, which I guess it
Yeah.
heightened his powers even more.
Yeah.
Because I guess that's the source of a lot of his powers. I think everything except the force power comes from the worms, I think.
Yeah.
I think
I
maybe
think
the
so.
force power comes from the religious aspect. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not even going to try to guess. I'm
Yeah.
sure someone else knows. Well, actually,
Yes.
in book
Yes.
3, chapter 10. But yeah, good stuff. I mean, everyone here is good actors. I mean, the characters are really one-dimensional. Like I said, with the exception of the mother, like everyone's there to like, I'm the evil killer that's gonna kill everything. I'm gonna randomly kill my own men. I'm gonna kill like they even gave him one of the few characters that was developed with the Sand People, the girl,
Yeah.
Zendaya's best friend. He ends up killing her just to make you hate him more, but he's a
That's right.
very one-dimensional villain. Like I said, everyone's pretty one-dimensional, with the exception of the mother. All the actors are great, but the characters are kind of flat. And again, there's a lot of time to cover, a lot of movie to cover, a lot of plot to cover, so I can
Yeah.
understand it. But as good as the performances are, the characters are a little flat to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Paul's army winds up attacking with atomics and sandworms, and the Emperor's Sardaukars are overpowered. And Paul challenges the Emperor for the throne, demanding Irulan's hand in marriage. But the other great houses arrive in orbit above them, and Paul threatens to destroy Arrakis's spice fields with the atomics if they intervene. So Fade Rautha steps in as the Emperor's champion, and this is where he learns that he and Paul are in fact cousins. Still, they wind up fighting, and he actually nearly kills Paul before Paul fatally stabs him. Irulan agrees to marry Paul on the condition that he lets her father live. The Emperor kneels and kisses Paul's signet ring. And up above, the great houses refuse to accept Paul's ascendancy, so Paul orders the Fremen to attack them. And Stilgar leads all the Fremen onto the captured Sardaukar ships, and Jessica and Alia sort of reflect on this being the beginning of a holy war. And meanwhile, a heartbroken Chani refuses to bow to Paul and leaves, preparing to mount a sandworm. So he actually tells her that no matter what happens, he will always love her, but he's going to go ahead and marry this other woman. And so this is kind of a bit of a sad ending, I suppose, for Chani. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, this should have been the movie where the point in the movie where there's a lot of emotional feelings going on. But again, my only real critique of this part two is the characters aren't that nuanced. So it's like,
Mhm.
do I really want this character to die? I want that. No, like the bad guys are all really bad,
Yeah.
and the good guys are all really good. So it's like there's not a lot of drama going on, especially
Yeah.
when you know, like, yeah, he's not going to die here, obviously. So that kind of relieved a lot of the ending. It just felt like formulaic and a matter of just like, all right, how interesting can they make this look? But it didn't really have a lot of drama to the ending for me. You kind of
Yeah.
knew how it was going to play out, especially with the fact that the princess that he's going to marry, they already plotted, they already told you what was going to happen. They
Mhm.
have a baby with the bald guy,
Yeah.
and she already has plans that she's going to marry either one, and they whoever dies, like if Paul dies, the mother has another kid, and
Yeah.
if the bald guy dies, then one of the other nun who tested him has a child for him. So they don't care who
Mhm.
wins. She's ready
Yeah.
to marry whoever wins, because it's like, it's whoever wins, like they already have their plan in place. And like I said, you
Yeah.
don't really like, you're invested in the story, but I'm not invested. There's no shades of gray character. Where that's where, like, I think Game of Thrones has an edge on this, is that like
Mhm.
they're like they would have like really bad characters that would redeem themselves. And it's like suddenly you're conflicted. Do you really want them to die because they've
Ah.
redeemed themselves in some kind of way? There's no characters that's like, man, I kind of like, when Batista dies, it's like it was funny. He got his
Yeah.
comeuppance. If he would have killed the emperor or not killed the emperor, I didn't care either way. So that's the
Yeah.
only thing. I wasn't emotionally invested in the ending, but overall, like, I can't complain about the execution and the story and the cinematography and directing, the acting. Everything was good. That would be my only critique of the ending. There was no emotional
Yeah.
investment.
Yeah. Well, I guess they probably were basically relying on Paul being the one character who's kind of in a gray zone in the sense that he wants to be good and he wants to do good things, but he also knows that he's kind of destined for perhaps some very bad things, and he tries to fight that, and in the end he seems to embrace it. And it's the same thing with the relationship with Chani, that I think she kind of sees that, she sees his downfall essentially, and it is a bit like a downfall, I suppose, in the same way that we've talked about it in the past with movies like The Godfather, where the character kind of becomes, in a way, what he doesn't want to be in the end. He sort of gets corrupted, or goes to the dark side, perhaps, to use another Star Wars thing here. He sort of winds up doing exactly what he didn't want to do in the earlier part of these movies. So, yeah, it's kind of a dark ending in a way, I think, and it's interesting. And I do
I
feel
think I
some,
see what you're saying, and I see that's what the movie's trying to accomplish, right?
yeah,
But have him do something that we didn't want him to do.
right,
What is, like in The Godfather, it's like, we don't want him to become a gangster.
yeah,
Gangsters are definitively bad.
yeah,
We didn't want him to betray his wife, and he did when he went to Italy. There were
yes,
things we did not want him to do that he did.
yeah,
There were shades of gray characters that died when his father
yes,
died, so he could become the Godfather. His father he was a criminal, but everything we saw of him, he did good things for his family. He did what was best for his
yeah,
family. So it's like, in
yeah.
here, what is Paul doing that we do not, as an audience, want him to do?
Well, I suppose marrying the princess instead of staying with Chani would be one thing. And I suppose just doing what he does when he takes command and he orders the Fremen to attack. He knows a lot of them are going to die. He knows there's going to be
But
a
it's
lot of
all
horrible.
nameless, faceless people that, like,
Well,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, true
yeah.
enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I guess if you're that invested in Zendaya and him hooking up, I guess, but I didn't really care.
no,
Maybe that's where it loses me. Maybe if I
yeah,
cared more about like them hooking up and him staying with his true love, then maybe I'm too cynical for that to be a factor. But
yeah,
I would have liked to seen him kill someone that we didn't want him to kill, or like,
yeah,
what if he would have killed that religious zealot where it's like, yes, I will kill him to show you that I'm a good leader. That would have been like, oh, dude, you're actually gonna kill him? Like that would have been like, oh, this has gone too far, you know?
Yeah.
Something like that. So
Yeah, well, it's a good point, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it on the same level as The Godfather in terms of
only one of us,
masterpiece
there are
or
two of us on this podcast. Only one of us compared it to The Godfather.
true enough. Yes, that's my fault, but no, I think it's the same idea though. That the character has a bit of a downfall in a sense. He's sort of he becomes the darker version of himself. But you're right that we don't know enough. There isn't enough character development or relationship development. Maybe if their relationship had been developed further, who knows? But yeah, it's all it's a big epic story, so there's not a lot of depth in any of these kind of details. So it's a little harder to feel the same emotion at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. But overall, I mean, it was a told story. It's a
Oh
great
yeah,
visual story. It's a
yes,
lot of story to tell. And again, I love it. I love it.
yeah,
And I wouldn't put it up there in the category of some of the other movies we referenced it with, but
yeah,
it's very good, and I'm glad I watched it. Um,
yeah. Me
you
too.
know, we have been watching Star Wars recently,
We
and I would
have.
say this is a definitely a more mature, more complex version of Star Wars. But
Yes.
honestly, I would say Star Wars is probably better
Yeah.
because they make you care about the characters a little bit more.
True.
I
Yeah.
have to think
It's a
about
little.
that. We're
Yeah.
gonna be reviewing Empire Strikes Back soon, so maybe when we
Yeah.
review that, I'll have a better idea.
Yeah.
I definitely don't like the third Star Wars that much, so we'll see
Right.
how well the third in this series goes.
Yeah.
Um, but it's definitely more mature in that sense. But
Yeah.
I don't know if I necessarily I connect with a lot of the characters on screen. That's my only critique on this series is
Yeah.
after watching like 5.5 hours of this stuff, how many
Yeah.
characters am I really connected with? You know,
Yeah.
what would you say
Yeah.
about that?
No, I agree. I mean, there were a lot of characters, and I had trouble kind of remembering who was who at times. These various characters who came in and out, and were kind of helpful or were friends of him or his father, and I had trouble kind of keeping them all straight. And yeah, I didn't feel like a lot of emotion. Like when that one guy, Idaho, when he died, I didn't feel much about that because I didn't feel that I really knew him very well. Um, Whereas I suppose when Ben Kenobi dies in Star Wars, I felt that as a kid. I really felt that. But yeah, I think it's interesting because Lucas was clearly influenced by these books, and so in a way, he had the benefit of these books when he created his world, and in a way, the filmmakers of these movies have the benefit of everything Lucas did, when he made his movies, because he was really pioneering a lot of the techniques that have gone on to be perfected, and in a way that, yeah, this does feel like a more mature, more polished version, I suppose, of something like a Star Wars. But I agree that it doesn't feel as fun, and it doesn't feel, yeah, like I care as much about the characters. But I did think it was very, very well done. It was very exciting. It was compelling. I enjoyed watching it. I was never bored, and I could see watching them again. I don't think it's like, ooh, I don't want to see that again. No, I think these are good movies, and I want to see what happens with the third because uh, Denis Villeneuve apparently is very keen to make the third movie, which will be based on the second book in the Dune series, Messiah of Dune. So, yeah, I think that could be very interesting, and I'll definitely be checking that out.
Yeah, I think he indicated he wanted to just finish off the trilogy.
Yes,
But there are a lot of books, so the
there
series may
are.
continue with other directors, maybe new
Yes,
casts. I do think there's a time jump at some point, so they can even just wait a couple of years and just bring in a new cast and
yeah,
focus on maybe his sister and other characters and things like that. Um, but I think even in the books, I think at some point he's not the central character either. So
yeah.
um, Yeah,
I think
it'll be
so
interesting.
too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and Denis Villeneuve, I feel a little bit embarrassed. He's a Canadian filmmaker. He's a Quebecois filmmaker. And he's made a lot of good movies, and I have to admit that I haven't really seen most of them, which is
Mhm.
odd. Um, I did see Enemy, which I know we talked about
Mhm.
possibly taking a look at on the
Mhm.
podcast, but I haven't seen most of his earlier Canadian films, and I also haven't seen really any of his big Hollywood films except now Dune and Dune Part 2. But this makes me think I do need to check out his other movies because I think he is a very good filmmaker. And listening to him talk, he's very thoughtful and he takes it seriously. So it's no surprise his movies are all considered to be good.
Yeah, I've seen Enemy, I've seen Prisoners, I've seen Sicario. I think Sicario might be his best film. It's
Oh,
really
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And obviously these two movies. I think I may have seen one other. I haven't seen Blade Runner just because,
No.
Jesus Christ, Blade Runner is so exhausting. There's like 20 different versions of the first Blade Runner. I've seen all the
Yeah.
different versions. I can't tell the difference because it's usually like months or years in between when I've seen each. I don't know which is supposed to be the definitive version, which is supposed to be the best version. They all kind of seem the same to me.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to get into it if they can't even
Yeah.
pick one version of the movie that you should watch, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I haven't seen his, I don't know if he was supposed to, if it's a sequel or a remake or a soft reboot, but I do know
Yeah.
he did a Blade Runner movie that didn't make a lot of money. I think these
Yeah.
are his most financially successful films, these two, especially the
Yes.
second one here. But yeah, he makes good movies though. At least visually, they're really good. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely be looking at the other ones.
okay.
All right. So, is there anything more to say on this before we move
No,
forward?
I think we've said it all. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good series so far.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, obviously, I've nitpicked a few things because we're critiquing it,
Yes.
and I fully acknowledge that, a lot of the critiques I had, a lot of that I didn't bother mentioning, and some that I did mention, they're answered. I mean, if you fill in the blanks, but filling in the blanks, you shouldn't have to do work when you watch a movie. All the
Yeah.
answers should be on the screen. You shouldn't have to like read the book or watch videos of people explaining all the things they didn't have time to get to. Um, but I think it does hold up though. Like
Yeah.
once the blanks are filled in for you, it makes sense. So it's not like, oh, well, he left this out, but now that I know that, these scenes don't make sense. No, he left these things out, but now that you know that, you can appreciate the scenes more. So it's well
Yeah.
crafted. Like, even though he didn't have time to develop the characters are still consistent with what you hear about them when you hear people talk about it or if you've read the book. So from that, it's
Yeah.
good filmmaking, but judging the movies by themselves, there are some critiques there that bother me, but overall, great. It's
Yeah.
two great movies.
Totally. Highly recommend them, and I will be looking at them again, I'm sure, at some point in the future. Any thoughts on what is next for us? No. So, this is Angus Combe for Sean Weathers, and we'd like to thank you for watching and listening to us. And
Why do you say it that way? And
as
we'd like to
opposed,
thank you. Why do you put the and in there? Why does it
don't
say
know.
thanks for
Don't know.
watching?
I don't know. That's a good question. I
This
can
is
try it
Angus
again.
Combe and for Sean Weathers, and we'd like to thank you. This is Angus Combe for Sean Weathers, and just wrap it up that way.
Yeah. Well, okay. This is Angus Combe for Sean Weathers. We'd like to thank you for watching. Class dismissed.
We'd like to thank you for watching the No Rules Film School podcast.
The No Rules Film School podcast.
Yeah.
Class dismissed.